Thief, His Wife and the Canoe, this April on ITV and ITV Hub.
A very good morning to you all, and thanks for being with us here on ITV this Monday. Time now to join the team and get this new week started on Good Morning Britain.
Good morning, Britain. Russia is accused of genocide in Ukraine. World leaders condemn Vladimir Putin and call for the Russian president to be held accountable for war crimes. The bodies of hundreds of civilians were discovered in towns near Kyiv.
Well, the international community is reacting with shock and horror to those images of men, women and even children in Bucha found dead in the streets and in mass graves as Russian troops withdraw. Here in Odessa, there have been more explosions overnight, air raid warnings this morning after a Russian missile attack on the city in the early hours of yesterday.
Those atrocities are our main story today. Meanwhile, police investigating Partygate are reported to have issued fines to government officials, including a former, very senior civil servant. Other fines have been issued to officials who attended a gathering in Downing Street on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral last April. We'll have the latest.
Travel chaos. EasyJet cancels around 100 flights today and British Airways almost 90. They blame staff shortages caused by COVID, and it comes after a weekend of long queues and delays at some of Britain's busiest airports.
Yes, airlines and airports being hit by very high levels of staff sickness just as we move into the exceptionally busy Easter holiday period. Holidaymakers really being urged to double-check travel plans before heading off.
The Foo Fighters picking up 3 awards at the Grammys, 10 days after the death of their drummer, Taylor Hawkins. But the show was stolen with an appeal from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Fill the silence with your music. Fill it today to tell our story. Tell the truth about the war on your social networks, on TV. Support us in any way you can, but not silence.
A milder day ahead with outbreaks of rain in the south, turning showery in the north, and the outlook unsettled as we head through the week. All the details of that and more coming up on Good Morning Britain.
Monday, 4th of April, 2022. Live from Television Centre in London. This is Good Morning Britain with Kate Garraway and Richard Madeley.
Yes, well, good morning. It's just gone 6 o'clock. Welcome to the programme. It's lovely being back with you, Kate.
It's lovely being back with you.
I wish we could have a more cheerful opening to the show. I mean, there are lots of enjoyable things we could be talking about, but the news has just dominated. It's as if we've gone back to 1945, isn't it?
You're talking about this terrifying and appalling revelations of scenes of what have been called war crimes, aren't they? Awful atrocities, particularly in areas close to Kyiv, of bodies and mass graves on a scale
We're not
that's terrifying.
talking about the kind of occasional incidental bad things that happened in a war zone. This looks like organised genocide. There's no mistaking this. These, of course, are the scenes of the Russian convoys and the tank convoys that were taken out by Ukrainian fighters. But the shots that we can't show you this morning, we wouldn't dream of showing you at this time of day, are just unspeakable. And what we're talking about is hundreds and hundreds of men, women and children, civilians, not fighters, civilians, with their hands tied behind their backs, shot, stabbed, executed, burned. We're talking about genocide, and it's happening in the centre of Europe in 2022. And we're going to be talking in a few minutes to an expert in this field, because it seems to me that the men who are committing these atrocities, which are very, very much in line with what the Gestapo and the SS were doing in 1944-45, as Europe was overrun by the Allies.
That's what you said when you came in this morning, and I think this will ring home with a lot of people. It feels like we're uncovering some of the horrors that we uncovered in 1945.
After the invasion.
As areas were liberated.
Yeah. And what strikes me is that unlike the Nazis, unlike what happened in certain parts of the world under the old Soviet Union, this is not something which is driven by ideology. These are young guys, these Soviet soldiers, who 7 weeks ago, were at McDonald's or ordering stuff online or driving out with their girlfriends for a pizza. And within weeks, these ordinary young men, many of them conscripts, have turned into these monsters. How does that happen? How does that process unfold? It's a question we'll be asking as we go
It is, because there is some argument that actually it is not the conscripts, although they're turning perhaps a blind eye to it. It is organised, targeted teams
terror
that
squads.
he's brought in, terror squads that he's brought in. Either way, as you rightly say, and, you know, these young men, and this is happening under our very noses. And also, potentially, I suppose, what's frightening is what more is going to be uncovered, and what more are we going to see?
Yes.
And what are people in Russia seeing?
Well,
If people in Russia are seeing something like this, how do they feel about it going on? Well, look, this is our top story this morning.
Just to answer that, in Russia, they're being told, as this is the propaganda line that's being sent out around the West, they're being told that this is fake news, that these are scenes which have been made up by the Ukrainians in order to win a propaganda war.
I'm not
It's
even
such
sure that
nonsense.
they're seeing the images either, Richard.
No.
Look, we're going to be talking about this all morning. Lovely, be fascinating, not perhaps lovely, to hear your views. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, is supporting very strong calls for the Russian President Putin to stand trial for war crimes because of this. As Richard said, bodies of hundreds of civilians have been found massacred on the outskirts of Kyiv.
Corpses apparently left lying on the street, just in the open air, and in very badly, shallowly dug mass graves after the Russian troops were finally forced to scramble into a retreat, so they didn't have time to cover it up. Many of the victims said to have had their hands and feet tied, and they'd been shot in the head or the chest at point-blank range. Our chief correspondent, Richard Gaisford, is a bit further away from that. He's in Odessa, but that's been coming under indiscriminate attack. Richard, before we talk about what's happening in Odessa, that's a very important part of this story. But this murder of civilians, it's clearly a war crime. What's Russia actually saying?